People often ask me, Rabbi, what do we Jews believe? Which is really an odd question. I say, well, I know what I believe. Don't you know what you believe? How can I speak for you? But I understand the question. They say we're members of a group. I'm not talking about my personal belief. The group has an official set of beliefs. Tell me what I should answer when somebody asks me what we believe. So already in that charade is the problem. Because if there's one value that religion or philosophy ought to give people, it's honesty, called integrity. People should be able to answer what they believe. So when we started out, we said we're going to drop the question, what are the official beliefs? How do we memorize them? We're going to sit around for a year. Since we're well-educated, fairly intelligent people, we're going to sit around for a year and listen to each other. Each one of us has strong beliefs. That's how we lead our lives. We have beliefs about right and wrong, right? Beliefs about the world. We have lots of convictions. So let's listen to each other and then figure out what it is that we do believe. And then we can organize something, right? If we can't organize it simply by getting the official statement, because then what happens is what happens in so many organized religions. People sit there and they recite words they don't believe. And so if you want to understand humanistic Judaism, it was an attempt, a struggle, a campaign for integrity in Jewish life.
So many of you know Rabbi Sherwin was the founder of Humanistic Judaism, and we wanted to share a little more of his background so you gain an understanding of how he became to be that visionary leader. Much of this information was taken from Sherwin's bio in The Life of Courage, which was written by Marilyn Rowans. So Sherwin was born January 25th, 1928. He was raised in a vibrant Jewish neighborhood of Detroit in the heart of Yiddish language and culture, with a Jewish bakery, Jewish butcher shop, and delicatessen all nearby. Customers and visitors could listen to political arguments, hear stories from the old country, learn about socialism, communism, Zionism, while also absorbing how to become fully assimilated into a secular urban world. He heard Hitler's speeches on the radio. His hero was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Jewish culture, political history, and American society were all major influences on his emerging worldview. Sherwin was also surrounded by many other philosophical influences, such as radical Reform Judaism, the ethical culture movement, Mordecai Kaplan, who founded Reconstructionist Judaism, and educator John Dewey, all while he and his family attended a conservative congregation every Saturday. Sherwin listened to the words of the Torah, sang the songs of his people, and internalized Judaism. But the questions emanating from his mind could not be contained.
Sherwin loved school. His successful high school years were not without the pain of World War II and the death of FDR. He was still very devoted to his religious connections, but he struggled with major philosophical issues, who he was and who he wanted to be. It was later, at the University of Michigan, that he put a name to this questioning and discovered his great love for philosophy. For a time, he considered getting his doctorate in philosophy, but his interests went beyond philosophy. He had also discovered in himself a very strong quality of leadership. Could he become a rabbi? He had already discovered that he was a humanist and that his connection to his ancestors was unyielding but cultural. The decision to attend Hebrew Union College came only after serious deliberation. How could he become a rabbi if he did not believe in God? He considered many careers, including law. After his father's death in 1948, he reaffirmed his deep connection to his Jewish roots. His loyalty to his father's Judaism, his own love of history, and the memorable impact of his childhood rabbi, Morris Adler, as a community leader and a charismatic role model, led him to a career in the Jewish rabbinate. He attended Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati in 1951, a seminary for Reform Judaism. Perhaps within the Reform movement, he could blend his personal humanistic philosophy with a modern Judaism. Sherwin was at the seminar. Sherwin was at the seminary when the Korean War began, and the Hebrew Union College encouraged its graduates to serve in the Army as chaplains even after the war ended. Sherwin was inducted into the Army 6 months after graduation, and in January 1957, at the age of 29, Rabbi Wein became First Lieutenant Sherwin Wein. Korea opened Sherwin's mind and heart in so many ways. Serving as a chaplain to the young Jewish soldiers reinforced his unique and changing approach to Judaism. Prayer and meditation were not high on the GI's list of needs. What they welcomed and appreciated in their young Jewish chaplain was his ability to speak directly to their concerns, to listen to their voices, and to appreciate who they were as individuals. He also set up lectures on topics of interest to them, providing intellectual stimulus and a time to share the comfort of their Jewish memories. Their Friday night services were more cultural than religious.
After the Army, Sherwin returned to a position as assistant rabbi at Temple Beth El in Detroit. The traditional liturgy became increasingly uncomfortable for him. After 18 months, he resigned and took a pulpit in Windsor, Ontario, with a new congregation, also called Beth El, which held the promise of developing a more modern Judaism. The Windsor congregation grew under his leadership, but then he received a call from former Beth El congregants in Detroit, a couple who were disenchanted with Beth El and wanted to meet with him to discuss creating a new suburban Detroit temple. When Harry and Suzanne Velick and 7 other couples met with Rabbi Wein in 1963, not even Sherwin realized what the future held for them. 8 couples and a rabbi decided to create a new Reform temple. It was not until a few months later that the real process of change began. The ritual committee, chaired by Rabbi Wein, began to explore what these new members really believed. Was God the ideal in mankind? Was God the angry God of the prophets? Was God the salvation God of the rabbis? Was God the limited God of John Dewey and Mordecai Kaplan? Was God just another name for nature? The congregation named itself the Birmingham Temple because the group often met in Birmingham. They established that the Birmingham Temple believed in humanistic Judaism, a Judaism that was people-centered rather than God-centered, a Judaism that affirmed that moral and ethical problems were solved from within each individual, not with the assistance of a supernatural force, a Judaism that believed in the strength of ordinary Jewish people to survive a history of persecution. A line was drawn in the sand between Reform and humanistic Judaism. The new humanistic Jewish community wanted to write their own meditations using words they did not have to reinterpret, words that reflected what they believed. It was an act of courage for Rabbi Wein and the members of his new congregation to make the decision to exclude God language in their liturgy.
Almost immediately, the Jewish community was up in arms. On January 29th, 1965, Time magazine wrote about the atheist rabbi. Letters of criticism came in from the local community. Letters of support arrived too. Sherwin Wein's response was one of defiance. He was determined to grow his community in spite of local Jewish condemnation. The Birmingham Temple expanded successfully over the next several years. The temple grew to more than 400 families, and enrollment in the Sunday school grew to more than 175 children. Sherwin Wein's sister Lorraine and her husband Ben were loyal supporters and supported Rabbi Wein emotionally and financially. We'll hear from their daughter Elyse today. Rabbi Wein's lectures and constant encouragement provided the environment in which the philosophy of humanistic Judaism flourished. Humanistic Judaism was not created in a vacuum. Jewish history is the history of change. Rabbi Wein was called upon to lecture all across the country. Responses to his lectures and press coverage resulted in national interest and support. Sherwin helped to found the Society for Humanistic Judaism in 1969 to mobilize communities in other cities to celebrate Jewish identity and Jewish culture with a humanistic philosophy. Many more national and international umbrella organizations followed for communication and to support and train leaders. Secular humanistic Judaism became a worldwide movement.
Rabbi Wein was a prolific writer, writing books and for magazines. He was a man of social action. He developed several social action organizations in response to injustice and fundamentalist irrationality. He was a firm believer in separation of church and state, civil rights, individual rights, and personal freedom. Rabbi Wein devoted his life not only to making humanistic Judaism a viable alternative in the Jewish world, but also to lecturing, teaching, and enriching others. Sherwin took 1 month of the year to travel with his life partner, Richard McMahons, every year. It was on one of those summer trips to Morocco that he was killed on July 21st, 2007, when the taxi he was in crashed. Humanistic Judaism was created by Rabbi Sherwin Wein at the Birmingham Temple, and from that foundation grew and blossomed an awe-inspiring approach to Jewish life that embraced the reality of the human condition and valued and loved the connection to the Jewish people. Now, in planning this celebration, all of us here on the committee agreed that the very best way to impart to all of you what Sherwin Wein was like was to simply let you hear for yourselves. So here is the first of 2 clips from the New Humanism Conference at Harvard, organized by our own Greg Epstein in June of 2007, just a month before Rabbi Wein was killed.
So, I'm going to tell you my story. Best way for you to understand humanistic Judaism. I was born in a problematic city. At one time, it was the great industrial capital of the world. I'll use the name Detroit. Our industry is now collapsing, but that's another issue I don't want to go into. So, and I was born into the world of Judaism. I didn't choose it. In the womb, they didn't come to me with a little, what would you like to be ideologically? Well, are you a Sartrean, a Deweyite? I fell out of a Jewish womb. Do you understand? Most people are what they are religiously because they're born into it. They don't choose, and they find themselves part of a culture. And my culture was the culture of a subnation of the Jewish people of Judaism. They're called Ashkenazic Jews. They come from Northern Europe. They had a language called Yiddish, and they had all the foods of Northern Europe. They're just wonderful. Onions, beets, carrots, cabbage. It's a culture. Do you understand culture? And so there they were, and I was born into this culture. And I must tell you, my parents belonged to a synagogue, a conservative synagogue. Did they ever sit around and have a discussion about God? We talked about anti-Semitism and Jewish survival, whatever. We never talked about God. Jews didn't sit around talking about God. They were secularized. Even my immigrant parents, they came to America. Took 2 weeks, Ellis Island, Lower East Side, Detroit. So I grew up in a Jewish world in which the issues were Adolf Hitler, not God. They were this worldly issues. And I grew up in this conservative synagogue, the ideology of which I did not agree with. But I didn't have nasty experiences. I had Jewish holidays and I loved them because they brought the family together. Do you know me? And they connected me to my ancestors, and I felt pretty good about that. One of the things it gave me was a deep sense of roots and connection, a larger family to which I belong. I mean, we can all say we all belong to the human family, but that's pretty big. I used to have these friends who loved humanity in general, but couldn't talk to their mother. Anyways. So I had I had positive experiences. And from very early on, I didn't believe what the prayer book said, but most of the people around me didn't because they didn't understand the prayer book because it was in Hebrew and they didn't understand Hebrew. So that was it. The mistake of the Reform movement was to translate the prayers into English. Mistake. So I had these positive experiences, and what certainly was the thing for my humanism was something called the Holocaust. How could you believe in a kind and loving manager of the world? I mean, the only conclusion you could reach is if there is a God, he is either one of two things. He is either cruel or incompetent. If he's cruel, he's lost his moral authority. And if he's incompetent, why do you want to bother with him? So, finished. Well, then I would look for a profession. I majored in philosophy at the University of Michigan. I wanted to do something in philosophy and with my Jewish cultural identity. I had a culture. The religion wasn't the main part of my culture, as in many respects, it isn't even the main part of Christian culture in Europe, certainly, and in most parts of North America, except the Deep South. So I chose the rabbinate. And when I got there, I found that half the students who were there were closet humanists. Vocabulary of worship. It did not fit what I believed or where I was, so it became intolerable. I could have done what most of the closet humanists who went to seminary with me did, and what is now at the heart of liberal religion, which is denounced by Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. I could have simply taken the word God and made it mean what it doesn't mean. See? God is love. Well, if you already have the word love, why do you need the word God? God is nature. Well, if you already have the word nature, I mean, the whole point. That is, we desperately want to hang on to the word that seems to confer authority. So separation from that word is for many people a traumatic thing. It's a vocabulary thing. And ultimately, I was liberated. And so I wasn't going to stay in the Reform rabbinate. So I went out and I organized a congregation that became the first congregation of what we call Humanistic Judaism.
So again, my name is Sunny Schwartz, and I'm just so happy to be in community today celebrating Sherwin wine with you, my rabbi. Sherwin officiated my parents' wedding in the early 60s. Humanistic Judaism was perfect for my parents. My mom was Jewish, but she was raised a Christian Scientist. But she rejected that as a young adult, and she always said she would have joined Unitarianism if she hadn't found Sherwin. My father was raised completely secularly by immigrant parents. In fact, the Birmingham Temple was too ritualistic for him. So my mother joined first, and then he followed, and I was born into Humanistic Judaism. Rabbi Wein was famous for his list speeches. So many lectures had points 1, 2, 3, and so on with examples. In his honor today, I'm going to share my top 7 things I appreciated about Sherwin. Number 1, his breadth of knowledge. Sherwin could give a speech on nearly every topic with a great deal of detail and understanding. He was so well-read, intelligent, and let's face it, opinionated. It was unbelievable the range of issues he could discuss with authority and imparting new knowledge from the current political situation to feminism to Jewish history, you name it. I remember after Sherwin died, my mom would ask, I wonder what Sherwin would think about this, whatever situation it was. We had come to rely on him for wisdom on how to approach what came at us. Number 2, he understood how to build community. The Birmingham Temple was way more than Rabbi Wein. He created a structure that let other leaders blossom with an executive director, lay leaders, volunteers. There was a book group, a movie group, a men's group, trips, book fairs, craft fairs, Monday night lectures, discussions, youth conclaves. So many choices of meaningful ways to learn and connect as a community. He added a memorial garden at the temple, installing a beautiful wall with names inscribed to be remembered. When my mother died, Sherwin had already died. Rabbi Jairus led me and my brother in a short service as we buried her ashes in the memorial garden. We didn't need a cemetery. We had the temple. And beyond the temple, Sherwin created community. Of course, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, the role is to help new congregations form. I went to Israel when I was 16 on a humanistic Jewish youth trip overlapping with the conference that established the International Institute of Secular Humanistic Judaism, solidifying both my Jewish identity and my deep connection to humanistic Judaism. Number 3, in the things I appreciated about Sherwin Wein, he was a visionary. Rabbi Wein was brave, articulate, and undeterred. He saw the potential for and created an international movement through speaking, writing, connecting with allies, and founding an entirely new Jewish denomination. He knew he was mortal and created a leadership training institute and handpicked people he asked to consider becoming humanistic Jewish rabbis. He always had his eye on the movement and the future. Number 4, he was my teacher. When I was young, he would impart some wisdom to the Sunday school students. I still remember his explanation for the correct way to spell Hanukkah and why. By the way, Chanukah. What I remember most clearly, though, is confirmation class from ages 14 to 16 and philosophy class in 11th and 12th grade. Confirmation class spent 2 years on Jewish history, Sherwin style, and 1 year studying humanistic Judaism. Philosophy class is where Sherwin really lit up. As you've heard, he was a philosophy major in college, and it was a passion. He pulled quotes from humanistic philosophers like John Dewey and Robert Ingersoll, and we discussed their meaning. I remember vividly, this is when I was in high school, the discussion we had about which was more important, happiness, survival, or dignity. As you can imagine, Sherwin's answer was dignity. Number 5, he wasn't perfect. Sherwin never presumed to be a saint and recognized that everyone has faults, including him. My mom wrote this in a memoir about being unsure if she picked the right person to marry. This is a quote from her memoir. Still not sure, I went to my rabbi and asked his advice, telling him that I didn't feel as if I was in love. He said, in the singularly worst piece of advice I have ever received, Carol, at our age, we cannot expect to hear bells. I have it on very good authority that in later years, he heard plenty of bells, end quote. Sherwin's intellect was unparalleled, but the part of being a rabbi that involved counseling was not always his strong suit. Number 6, Sherwin's work ethic was extraordinary, but he also took a month off each year. I remember he told me he worked about 80 hours a week during the year. He said it didn't mean much to him to take a day off, but he saved that time off for a once-a-year, month-long travel adventure with his partner, Richard McMains. The temple shut down in July. Number 7, and the top thing I appreciated about Rabbi Wein, he was there for our family. I remember he was in our house the day my father died. He asked me, when was the last time you saw him? To help me start to evoke positive memories. When people were sick, he visited the hospital. He officiated my brother's bar mitzvah and my confirmation. We spent holidays with Rabbi Wein. He felt like part of our family. as you can see from the picture on the screen. I still miss Rabbi Wein, his wisdom, his leadership, his teachings, and his presence in my life. Over the years, KB has debated if we want a rabbi or not. I always come down on the side of yes. That's because I was privileged to have the experience of a learned, inspiring, ethical, visionary leader who was always there for us.
So I also grew up at the Birmingham Temple. My parents, Nina and Jerry Schneier, who are in the center of that picture on the far side, joined in the mid-60s. They were not among that first group of 8 families, but shortly thereafter. Rabbi Wein was a strong presence in our lives. He officiated the weddings of both my sister and my brother. These are photos from my brother's wedding. I'm the little one behind the groom. Uh, as well as, of course, my bat mitzvah and my brother's bar mitzvah. Because I did not continue studying with Rabbi Wein beyond age 13, my memories of him are more from a child's perspective, but they are nonetheless indelible. First and foremost, Rabbi Wein was a commanding presence. When he was speaking, it was impossible not to pay attention. He spoke with an authority, but also with a curiosity in a manner that led you to feel that he was constantly inviting you to fill in answers for yourself. Despite the somewhat intimidating presence he sometimes imparted, his sense of humor was always present as well. A famous Sherwin wine anecdote in my family involved my mother, who in today's parlance we might like to say sometimes like to be a little bit extra. When someone sneezed, instead of just saying bless you or gesundheit, she often liked to respond with God bless you and keep you and shine the light of his countenance upon you and bring you peace. So she once said this to Sherwin, and his response was, I'll never sneeze again. I don't think it is controversial to say that he was not a singer. But that did not, however, deter him from chiming in on every song with an omnipresent Rex Harrison sort of speak singing that was actually very charming. The unique rhythms and cadences of Rabbi Wein's voice when he spoke, however, were frankly very musical in their own way. I will never forget the way he always said, Rosh Hashanah, always. You can hear these rhythms in the continuation of the video that we watched earlier from the New Humanism Conference, which we'll hear now, in which he discusses the foundations of Humanistic Judaism.
Let me give you the principles of Humanistic Judaism as succinctly as I can. First, and I didn't originate this idea, Judaism is the culture, not the religion. The word Judaism is like the word Hellenism also. All right? Judaism is the culture of the Jewish people. It's a culture. And in fact, it was at one time dominated by the clergy, but it has elements that go beyond religion. It has music and dance and food, do you understand? And ethical values that are independent of divine authority, and a history and memories. So it's a culture. Why do I have to throw away the culture if I have no interest in what is narrowly called the religion? Huh? So the second statement was that my experience as a Jew made me realize that Jewish history indeed was a testimony to humanism. The last conclusion you would come watching the history of the Jews, like watching the history of the blacks, is that there is a kind and loving administration. It's the last conclusion you would come to. In fact, my experience as a Jew always led me to feel that indeed that wasn't the case. There were 2 characteristics of Jewish culture that I love, and they all, to some degree, came from the negative experiences that Jews had in their historical experience. I loved it certainly far more than praying, which was intolerable. Ambition. In the Talmud, it says, every man should be content with his lot. Well, Jews aren't. And the reason they're not is they can't trust the administration. Do you understand that? If they had taken all the old principles like that, they would never have made it to Harvard. All right. And the second thing was Jewish humor. Jewish humor is expressed in the Shalom Aleichem story, where Tevye, you know, and Fiddler on the Roof says to God, I want to thank you for making us the chosen people, but would you mind choosing somebody else for a child? Now that's a Jewish joke. No, it is. Now that's the culture. There's an underground culture, do you understand, that isn't expressed in the prayer book. It was always a part of what I call the Jewish world, and it was the part that I loved that reinforced the humanism. So the third thing is humanism is enhanced. My humanism is enhanced by my contact with my family and historic culture. It's not undermined. It is what? It's something additional that is enhanced, and one of the things it gives me. Salman Rushdie said when he, or was it Steven Pinker? I think. Who said the chess club? Did you say chess club joining a humanist association? Yeah, right, Pinker, right. So joining the humanist organization was like joining the chess club because there's no emotional content. There's no connection to family. Do you understand? To history, to roots, to whatever. It's an ideological organization that meets somewhere. All right. So what it did was it enriched my humans. And in fact, that was my message. And out of it, other people who certainly couldn't connect simply to joining a militant humanist organization came to humanistic Judaism. It was a vehicle for doing that. And in fact, that's what I mean. They were not hostile. They were what? Secularized. So I didn't come to them with the message of the wounded. I came to them talking about my pleasure. Do you understand? In my culture and in humanism as a philosophy of life, I refused to say what I did not believe, which is an X principle. We will not do the tactic of traditional liberal religion, which is to take old words and make them mean what they don't mean. We say it loudly and clearly. We're humanists. We do not talk to God. We do not pray to God. We are in charge of our lives, and there is no need to have God as the foundation of our ethical principles. That's what it is. But then we also have a whole history. Over the last 300 years, the majority of the Jewish people has been secularized. Felix Posen sponsored a survey of Jews in North America who were offered an alternative. 2 words. Are you religious or secular? 47%. Is that right? 49. See how conservative I am. 49% said secular. Well, that's humanistic Judaism.
And you know, the story, the reason he mixes that up is because he had been hearing from Rushdie, the great iconic author, and Pinker the previous night, and you know, it was a great conversation. There were a lot of ideas, and he just forgot which one had said which. We brought Rushdie there because we wanted to bring Sherwin, and it took about 4 years to put into motion that plan, but I wanted to put Sherwin on stage with Rushdie. Sherwin could talk about humanistic Judaism. Rushdie could talk about humanistic Islam. I told Rushdie in 2003 that I'd like to invite him to Harvard to do this. Rushdie said, okay, in theory, I guess I'm interested. I had no Harvard affiliation at the time, but that's what I told him, and we made it work in 2007. I do want to say, for the people who didn't know Sherwin, and this kind of group tends to be, I think, a very good thing, tends to be filled with real free thinkers, critical-minded people who are not into hero worship. And there could be a little bit of a vibe in an event like this, a bit of a hero worship. If you're thinking to yourself, wait, I thought this was a nonprofit organization, right? Um, th- did you hear in that speech, or in any of his speeches, did you hear him saying, oh, worship me, praise me, tell me how great I am? I mean, you don't hear it, right? It wasn't in the clips that we edited out either. He didn't mind your attention. In fact, he expected it. But it was for doing good work, not for just praise me. And so he felt more comfortable, I think, pointing out the good work of others than he would, just having you, praise him obsequiously. And so I want to say, Sunny and I went for a walk a couple years ago, and she told me that she wanted to do this. And I said, okay, that sounds like a long time from now. I have no attention span for that, Sunny. But you made it happen. I mean, this is your work, Sunny, and it's a lifetime coming for you to honor who you are and how you became who you are in this way. So you did it, and give Sunny a round of applause. It's amazing work. He influenced you, but then you became a person of deep values, and that's why we're here doing this right now. And no, he wasn't obsequiously asking for obsequious praise, but he was, for me, the best teacher I ever had. The most skillful, the most influential formal teacher I ever had, anybody I ever sat with. In years and years of sitting in formal educational settings, this guy was the best, most skilled teacher I ever got a chance to observe. And that means a lot. You sit 18 years later and you honor that. That's what you do. I mean, I think we're well out of the danger zone of hero and prophet worship. We're doing the right thing. And I think we're also honoring the fact that these are ideas that the world could use right now. There are a lot of problems in the world today, as you may have noticed, and one of them is this crisis of what I would think of as balancing universalism and particularity, right? We want to reach out to the whole world, to make peace, to have understanding, but we each have our own individual groups, our own perspectives, our own pain, our own hopes. And so how do you balance that? It's becoming more urgent than ever in some ways. And so this Humanistic Judaism, it was a real strategy for doing that work. And it's a tool that he and the people who worked alongside him gave us. And we need to use it because it's in need right now. There are a lot of theorists and thinkers who could talk about how to do that. And you saw he could talk to that conference. He stole the show. There were we got a lot of famous speakers to come to that conference, and several of them told, who was that guy that upstaged me? But they were, it was a happy thing. His entire life was a message about how to balance that universalism and that particularity. And academically or even ethically, beyond the sort of lived experience of people like my mom and my wife and my own children, that was the most influential message that I've ever received. So even if I don't follow his every prescription or use every piece of liturgy that he may have created in my day-to-day life, although Sherry and Richard pulled out some gems and made me want to go back and reread some of that stuff. So thank you both. I consider myself to be part of his legacy And by being here, in some way, so are you. Um, he counseled us to be honest during celebrations of life. And he, I'll mention that this book, Staying Sane in a Crazy World, the title, it's a little ableist now. Is that something that we would call it? But whatever you call sane or crazy, whatever word you might prefer, we've got some problems in our world today that are really quite beyond reason. And we need that message of staying sane through humanistic ethics. And, we can take a breath. We can straighten our backs. He walked very straightly. I try to remember that. I fail usually. And we can remember him in the way that he would appreciate most, by incorporating his teaching into our lives. So with that, I'm just really honored to be able to bring somebody up who was one of his closest people in the world. Somebody who, nobody can reflect on every aspect of a person, but Elyse is as good as you can get in the world. And, is one of the people who's been carrying on his legacy and drove up with her partner, Gary, all the way from home, not close by. Thank you so much for being here and doing this with us, Elyse.
Thank you so much.
Put back in your place.
Hi, everybody. I have a little bit of a hoarse voice, but I hope you can understand me. I love this congregation. This is such a great event. My uncle would love it. Had to hold back my hand because I wanted to volunteer for some of the things that were being asked for. So anyway, thank you, KB, for organizing the event. Special thanks to Sonny Schwartz and Greg Epstein and to Sherry and Richard and doing such an amazing job. And thank you for including me. It's an honor to be here. I'm also sending warm greetings from my sister Billy, who is sorry she couldn't be here today. I am a very lucky person. I've had three parents guiding my life: my mother, my father, and my uncle. Uncle Sherwin had a major influence and it was a source of unconditional love and support. Among my earliest and fondest memories are visits from my uncle. Way before he was a famous rabbi, he would just come over and play with my sister and me. Every time he came, we begged him to tell us a story, and he never disappointed. They were always made up on the spot. A favorite was the one about the woman who learned to play the piano with her very large nose. You get the idea. From a very early age, my world was a bigger place than anyone else I knew growing up. There I was, 10 years old, the beginning of Humanistic Judaism, having to defend my uncle to people who tried to taunt me for his views. Yes, this really happened. I had to figure out pretty fast what heretic, atheist, and humanist meant, and how to defend him in my own way. How dare they attack my beloved uncle? I was mad. By age 12, I could be part of a conversation about whether the word God should be part of a humanistic service and whether it was okay to leave out the Shema. So you've heard from almost all of the presentations here. My uncle loved Jewish community. My mother told me that some of her happiest memories, were walking to shul Saturday while holding her father's hand. I am sure my uncle was holding the other hand. And walking up and down their street on Friday evenings, stopping in at the homes with the best Shabbat gatherings. The family loved their conservative congregation and leader, Rabbi Morris Adler. He set the example for leading a vibrant Jewish community, and my uncle wanted to create the same for people who are humanists. Ethical culture, and Reconstructionism were not enough. When I was reading a book about Nurse Nancy at about age 8 and was dreaming about how I would one day follow in her shoes, I distinctly remember where I was sitting when my uncle said, why not think about being a doctor?" At that moment, my world became larger. When I decided I wanted to become a city planner, my parents were dumbfounded. They had never heard of city planning. In came my uncle, pronounced it an excellent, timely choice, and on I went to a profession that I still love today. When I was about to start my senior year in college, and I needed a break from what I can no longer remember, my parents were worried, but figured I would safely go live on a kibbutz in Israel. But no, I wanted to go to Africa. Uncle Sherwin supported my dream, changed his summer plan, and he arranged to start my trip with me by traveling first to Brazil and then to South Africa and Rhodesia. My uncle was an avid walker. My first great walk with him was through what had to be the entire length of Rio de Janeiro. In Africa, he arranged for us to meet with someone from almost every point along the political spectrum. First, it was dinner with Helen Zussman, Jewish member of parliament, later a humanistic Jewish role model, who had devoted her adult life to fighting apartheid. The second day, it was an afternoon with an Afrikaners family who supported apartheid. Then another day, we were off to meet Zulu families who had been working on the same vineyard since colonial days. So this was how you learn about the world. Because of my uncle, I understood my obligation to be a citizen of the world. He used those exact words. I observed how he systematically traveled to experience different cultures firsthand, then how he taught the rest of us on his return. There were few things better than listening to my uncle make sense of a complex political situation. Let me share one story here. Soon after my uncle's death, my sister and I met a woman who regularly attended my uncle's lectures at the Center for New Thinking that he founded. After expressing her condolences, she couldn't help herself as she asked us if we knew what my uncle thought about Iraq before he died. Remember, this was 18 years ago. She needed him. His sermons were memorable. I recall people taking notes, especially during the high holidays when he spoke about the biggest concerns of our lives. Whenever I had a problem, big or small, I would call him, sometimes pretty late. He never told me it was too late. Uncle Sherwin always started with the framework to give my situation a larger context, and then came the advice. I've heard a lot of people talk about how my uncle empowered them. But frankly, he did not have a lot of patience to wait for us to make the right choice. He directed us. He was invariably right. One bit of advice I did not take. When my husband and I were thinking about names for our soon-to-be-born daughter, he first gave me the rundown of popular names in the baby naming ceremonies of late. Then he advised us to reject them all and suggested we name our daughter Persephone. My parents and my uncle shared strong relationships based on mutual respect and devotion to one another. I think our family was his backstop. My mom supported him from childhood onward, and Sherry was asking me, they really not fight? And it's true, they never fought, except about the bathroom and the one bathroom in their house as she was growing up. My dad was grateful for how my uncle framed his own feelings about Judaism, and he helped him with the practical aspects of life. Think cars, insurance. And there's the quip from my dad. He founded, I funded. Their relationships were never dragged down by pettiness, dishonesty, jealousy, or meanness. And my uncle shared a long, loving relationship with his partner, Richard McBain. They traveled the world together and shared so many memories. My uncle had tremendous energy. I have a strong memory of him arriving home after a trip. He sat down for a moment and said, "Let's go to the movies." In my own family today, we call this maximum fun. He was also willfully positive in how he lived his life. He modeled for me and for all of us, really, how to be good humored in the face of life's randomness and to face my life with courage. This way of being in the world has meant more and more to me as I've faced the serpents of adult life. About 25 plus years ago, my uncle shared his favorite poem with me. It's called Testament or Homage to Walt Whitman by Erica Jong. I'm going to read some highlights for you, and I encourage you to read the whole poem sometime. I'm going to open this book now, just as my uncle often took out a book by a modern Jewish thinker to share with us at services when tradition would have included a reading from the Torah. I, Erica Jong, put in your own name here, in the midst of my life, having had 2 parents, 2 sisters, 2 husbands, 2 books of poems, and 3 decades of pain, having cried for those who did not love me and those who loved me. For those I did not love, declare myself now for joy. There is pain enough to nourish us everywhere. It is joy that is scarce. There are corpses piled up to the mountains and tears to drown in. Rage is a common weed. Anger is cheap. Righteous indignation is the religion of the dead. Unhappiness is cheap. Childhood is a universal affliction. I say to hell with anyone who would suck on misery. Gloom is cheap. Doom is cheap. If the apocalypse is coming, let us wait for it in joy. Let us not gnash our teeth. Let us not scorn laughter. Let us laugh and bring plenty to the scorners. I resolve now for joy. That was my uncle. So you can imagine my uncle is with me every day. I am very grateful for this legacy. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Adam Shalom. He's the Dean for North America for the International Institute for the Secular Humanistic Judaism. He's the Rabbi of Kol Hadash in the Chicago area. And he also sat only a few rows away from my family at the Birmingham Temple while growing up.
Robert F. Kennedy, the good one, once said, "Some men see things as they are and say, 'Why?' I dream of things that never were and say, 'Why not?'" In the early 1960s, Rabbi Sherwin Wine faced a dilemma. He was very committed to his Jewish identity. He was raised in an ethnically Jewish neighborhood of Detroit by Yiddish-speaking immigrant parents. He had been successful at rabbinical school at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. He had served as a Reform rabbi, both as an army chaplain and in multiple congregations for several years. And he enjoyed being Jewish. He enjoyed being a rabbi. He was good at being a rabbi. He was an inspiring speaker. He was a talented teacher. He was an engaging personality and a striking presence. At the same time, Wine was also a committed philosophical humanist. He had been nationally recognized as a scholar of history in high school. This was a lifelong interest in finding out what really happened about the past. He had done graduate study in philosophy at the University of Michigan, getting all the way to almost finishing his PhD. Wine was a cosmopolitan lover of knowledge and culture. He loved traveling the world. He loved exploring the wide varieties of the human experience. Wine was clearly not a theist. The best term for what he was actually is agnostic, which means you don't know and there's no way to know whether there is or is not a God. In other words, let's focus on what we can know in the world. You see, Wine was always a positive humanist. He's someone who emphasized the power of human beings to be in charge of their life, the importance of human knowledge to understand the world, and the responsibility that people had to work on making that world better together without supernatural authority. especially without anyone who claimed to have supernatural authority, and that's what made him feel inauthentic as a Reform rabbi using the trappings of theistic religion. But rather than give up on either his humanism or his Judaism, Wine said, why not? And he blazed a path to integrating a humanistic approach to life with a cultural Jewish identity that we today call Humanistic Judaism. In November 1963, he was part of the founding of a new congregation called the Birmingham Temple in suburban Detroit. It was Reformish initially, but it evolved quickly to become a fully humanistic congregation by the summer of the next year, in its liturgy, in its youth education, in the sermons Wine provided, and in the messaging about the community. There was some controversy about being an atheist rabbi. Some of the religious said, why bother being a rabbi if you're not a theistic believer? And some secular people said, why bother being a rabbi if you're not a theistic believer? But there was also a lot of positive interest from others facing the same dilemma and interested in Wine's synthetic solution. By 1970, Wine had helped to found an association of humanistic rabbis and also a society for humanistic Judaism with 3 congregations initially. Kahal Breira was one of the early expansion communities. Wine also started a lecture series in Detroit called the Center for New Thinking, which gave him a chance to explore his interests in history, philosophy, geography, culture, literature, and it was beyond Jewish interests to some extent. It showed him to be a real Renaissance man. If you have a chance to visit the tribute website, sherwinwine.com, you can get a flavor of his wide range of interests and the thousands of audio lectures and presentations that are a part of that tribute site. By 1980, Wine had published collections of humanistic Jewish liturgy. He had published a humanist Haggadah for Passover, and his first detailed explanation, called Humanistic Judaism, of his approach to Jewish life. He also made initial connections with secular Jews in Israel, which would lead to many fruitful and collaborative partnerships between the two communities, secular Jews there and humanistic Jews here, that continue through today. During the 1980s, Wine also helped to establish a number of important institutions. There was the Humanist Institute in partnership with Ethical Culture and the American Humanist Association, whose goal was to train humanist leaders, and it's still doing so to this day. There was a leadership conference of secular and humanistic Jews created to build bridges and to certify new leaders with the secular Jewish world. There was an International Federation of Secular Humanistic Jews, which was designed to connect secular Jewish organizations in many corners of the globe. And, still today, he founded an International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. Its goals were to publish materials, to offer adult learning opportunities, and also to train professional leaders, spokespeople, educators, and, beginning in 1992, secular humanistic rabbis, like me. During the 1980s, Wine also wrote the first edition of his most thorough explanation of humanistic Judaism, called Judaism Beyond God, still in print, and published a collection of liturgy used by the Birmingham Temple in its first 25 years, appropriately titled Celebration. Now, training leaders and rabbis, leading congregations, writing, teaching, speaking multiple times a week, you might think that Wine didn't have time to be a good and caring congregational rabbi. Wrong. Wine always made you feel like you had his entire attention and his full time. He was wonderful with phone calls and hospital visits and handwritten notes and his beautiful calligraphy. Wine was wise and kind. He was brilliant and insightful. He was knowledgeable and also willing to listen carefully. I had the chance to experience him interviewing a family for a funeral. He took almost no notes and then delivered his eulogy as if he had had a tape recorder running, just from one small card with a few words written down to remind him what he wanted to say. And Wine was very funny. He loved to laugh. One of his favorite sayings of mine, laughter always seemed to me more Jewish than praying. Now, Wine's most important legacy is us. Wine taught us that this life is the only life there is, and that we live on through the impact we have in the world. The generations of students and adults that learned from him, the thousands of ceremonies he conducted. He was one of the only rabbis doing intermarriages in the 70s and 80s into the 90s. He did close to 4,000 wedding ceremonies in his career. The words he wrote that continue to move us in songs and poetry and prose. The ideas that continue to inspire us and still speak to the human and the Jewish condition and the intersection of the two. These are his legacy, and every humanistic Jew is his heir. So if anyone ever complains, why is humanistic Judaism not better known? Why is Sherwin Wine not better known? Don't complain. Dream of what can be and ask, why not?
So thank you to everyone for joining us today in person and on Zoom. I hope you learned something new about Sherwin Wine today that maybe you didn't know before. I want to thank the fellow speakers today, and I want to thank Lydia and Dennis for running the AV, and thank you so much for coming.